Welcome to Something You Can Do, a podcast for people hungry for action steps. I'm your host, KJ Kozak, and I started this podcast because it combines my three favorite things: helping people get stuff done, building community, and talking to hear my own voice. Together, we'll learn about many things you can do. Some things you won't want to do, some things you might not be able to do, but I hope that this episode inspires you to get out of bed, get off the couch in body or in spirit, and find something you can do. I'm so excited to be here today with Natalie Pan. Natalie is a coach, engineer, entrepreneur, and advocate with experience working in the tech and nonprofit spaces. She's the COO of Women Founders Bay, which works to decrease the fundraising gap in women's issues. And across all her projects, Natalie's mission is to coach people to make positive impact in the world. Natalie, welcome to Something You Can Do.
Thank you for having me here, Kat.
So excited that you're here. So tell us, what is Something You Can Do?
So something you can do is interior painting, repaint your rooms. And I guess that goes back to me in university being approached by one of these student painting companies where I ended up developing the skills, painting people's houses for the summer, doing estimates, getting a crew, and learning these, useful skills. Yeah.
That's amazing. It sounds like it was a whole project.
Yeah, I don't remember how many houses we painted. I feel like probably over 20 houses.
So why might someone want to paint houses, their own or somebody else's?
Well, it's for me, it's extremely satisfying because now every time I go into a space that I might live in, I can actually imagine how it would be, because when you paint a room, it's like a facelift. You can change the whole environment. And so this year when I moved into my new apartment, I found a really good deal. But if you looked at it, it was, not as beautiful or amazing as it could be. And just by me utilizing those skills, I was really able to make the place my own. So it's a great skill to have. Yeah.
Oh, that's so special. So, like, you talked a little bit about how you responded in university to like a particular ad or whatever, but like, can you talk a little bit more about what brought you to this in the first place?
So I was always of the mindset that I'm entrepreneurial and I need to develop these entrepreneurial skills. And so when I was approached by this student painting franchise group, they, advertise it as a way for students to learn how to run a business. And so I was willing to like get out of my comfort zone and being like, I don't know how to do any of this, but they say they can teach me this. I know I want to be an entrepreneur one day, so let me have a go at it.
That's so cool. And what I love about this thing that you've brought us today is that it's like not just the painting and it's not just the business. It's like all of these things wrapped up together. Like for you, it sounds like the painting and the business really go together very closely.
Yeah. I also consider myself, I mean, I think entrepreneurship is also quite creative. So a painting business is great. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I want to come back in a little bit to like this idea of the painting business. But first, you mentioned that this particular franchise taught you about painting. What are the steps to painting the interior of your home?
Yeah, so actually, I would say, I mean, they taught a little bit, but what happened was luckily, one of the students or crew that I hired, his dad was a contractor. And so he had, learned and painted with him over the years. And he had all the tips and tricks and taught the rest of we had three crews running. He taught the rest of us how to do interior painting, or we also did outdoor staining and whatnot. Yeah. His name was Alex. We're, still once in a while message each other on Instagram, have fond memories of that summer we painted together. Uh, yeah, and I saw he just recently went to Burning Man as well.
That's awesome. I love that, and the connection too. It's not surprising that somebody would also go to Burning Man who's interested in these types of things. It feels like the vibe. What are some of these tips? Like walk us through it. What happened? You decided that you wanted to paint your house. What comes next?
Okay, so I mean, I think one of the first things I always like to tell people is buy good quality paint. It's so easy to be like, hey, well, this bucket of paint is $30 and this one is like $80 or $90. But it is worth paying the $80 or $90 because when you buy cheap paint, it's very thin and you'll have to do 3, 4, maybe 5 layers depending on how bad the quality of paint is. But when you buy good quality paint, I would say in most instances you don't even need to prime. It's not like unless your walls are extremely oily and dirty, and that's also just some prep work. uh, Good quality paint will stick. And so two things you're covering for is making sure it's going to stick and stay there, and then that it'll cover the color that's under it. And so in most cases, I don't think we have, extremely bright colors that are hard to cover. And so if you buy good paint, usually in 2 coats, you'll be able to cover it. You won't need to prime. And so that will save you a whole, one layer of painting. And those are hours and hours of work. And that's worth more than the 50. And let's say you buy 2 buckets of paint for a big room, it's worth more than the $100 you might have spent extra on the paint. So that's the first thing to take note of. And
Mhm.
I really like, I mean, I feel like Benjamin Moore is always a really good brand that people like. And they do a great job at having, popular colors. I forget what they call it, but they kind of have like, hey, these are kind of the go-to colors. And you can't go wrong with those. Like they've kind of checked those, they make sure they look good. And so generally, like I love their Chantilly lace, the white. Usually when you want to paint a room white, I always go with that. And when I was talking to a real estate agent for a property that family member was going to sell, they were also suggesting, and they mentioned Chantilly lace for white. So it's a very common known fact. They have good standard colors, so they're a safe choice, and they have good quality paint. There are other good brands out there, but that's a very well-known one. Yeah.
Nice. We were a Sherwin-Williams family. So my mother actually, when I was growing up, would from time to time be like, the walls are boring. We have to change them. Like we painted our bedroom like a periwinkle blue. She painted the living room like a deep forest green. So I have very fond memories of going to Sherwin-Williams, going to Home Depot, playing with the swatches, picking out the paint. And I will say, I really appreciate your tip about getting the higher quality paint because priming was always, I feel like that process just sucks the joy out of painting your house because when you have to start, so for people that have never heard of this before, priming is basically when you take a special type of paint that's like white and you paint it over the walls so that you get a good surface to put your color onto. And it's horrible because you're so excited to paint and you got this beautiful rich color and then you have to like spend all of your time and all of that excited energy painting your house, painting the room in this like boring white. So like I definitely love this idea. Like I think that for a lot of people it'll be totally worth it to take like, yeah, spend a little more and then instead of having to do all of that really exhausting, prep work, you get to just put that splash of color right onto the walls.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And thank you for also defining priming. I just assumed everyone
it's one of those words that like from context clues, like you can almost certainly figure it out. But that's one of those things for me. I realized it's actually like one of my quirks is that I always define things. I think it's because I read too much as a child. So I like always appreciate when having things explained. So
so on the topic of priming, I feel like another time you will need to prime. And so I would say most of the preps that you need for doing an interior is you probably need to get some plaster to fix some holes or bumps in the walls, or maybe you had some old nails that you had to like pull out or push through and there's little holes. So then you'll want to get like some plaster to fill that up and smooth out the wall. Another tip there is that you want to put as little as possible. So you sand as little as possible, because the closer you can kind of spackle, or like I'm not sure if I'm using the right terms. I know how to do it, but the closer you could get it smooth on the wall, the more likely it's gonna actually follow the wall. Because when you put a lot and then you try to sand it, your sanding might be uneven, and so the amount you put should be minimal. And so this is a place where you will need to prime. So once that dries, and you sand it down, depending on how much of a perfectionist you are, if you sand it down, and what I like to do is I like to touch it with a hand to see if it's flush, if it's a big area. Else, if you can visibly see if it's perfect or not, you might want to do this process again. And obviously, the bigger the hole, or the bigger the thing that fixed, the more time you can do. And that obviously is one of the longer processes, because it takes time for it to dry. If it's a small area, you can probably get light spackle, which is easier and faster to dry. But if it's a bigger area, and you can always ask, the people selling the paint, they should know, like, hey, generally, if you tell them what you're doing, if it's the ceiling or whatnot, which spackle would work better. But after it dries, that is something you will want to prime. And you don't necessarily have to buy primer. If you have good paint, what I do is I just do a layer, like a spot area, to make sure I cover any of the plaster, the dried plaster, with the paint that I'm actually going to paint in. So let's say if you're doing your forest green, I would just use that forest green that I'm planning to do the whole wall with, but I would do a first coat in that area. Because what happens is when you don't do that, you'll see that it sucks in some of the moisture into the plaster and it changes the color slightly. And so if you just happen to paint your full wall without doing that priming, you'll notice where the plaster, where the green is going to look slightly off, a little darker or whatnot. And so that's an area where you have to prime. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's really useful for me to know.
So I think most of the time, when you get started, the funnest part is rolling, because you're gonna see a huge transformation. But if you want to do a really good paint job, it's all about the prep work. If you are patient with doing the prep, and so for most of us, we're probably gonna get painter's tape. Especially if you're not someone who paints a lot, to like tape out your edges of your ceilings. If you're doing the ceiling to the wall a different color, you're going to have to, put some tape so that when you go in with a brush, you're not going to touch the ceiling, for example. Or if you're maybe transitioning walls and you're going to have a different color on one wall, the other in the corner, if you want a really straight line, I would use painter tape to make that line super straight. And then also if you're doing carpet, right, you want to get some really thick painter's tape so it can overlap and you can really seep in the line to where the carpet is. And I would totally pay for, something to cover your carpet, like fully cover, like take the time to, because getting paint out is a hassle, but always have a wet cloth on you when you're painting so you can wipe things down as quickly as an accident happens. And it's worth, really getting something that can absorb the paint and not seep through. So I see they have like these huge roll of thick construction paper, and you can like pad your floors with that, or you could get drop cloths if you think you might be doing a lot of painting. So taking the time to do prep work. So you will need painter's tape, like some sort of cover drop cloth. You're gonna need your paintbrush, your roller, and then your roller handle is definitely useful because you'll have more even wall rolling, or I don't know, paint coverage if you use it. And what else? I mean, you will need like tooling for your plaster and then whatnot. So those, and at least a minimum a sanding block. So those are your and your painter's tray. And so if you are planning to do a lot of painting, and something I've noticed, I'm originally from Canada, that I've noticed here in America is that all the stores tend to sell these cheap painter's tray that are kind of one-time use, and it's disappointing because back at I think it was Benjamin. No, it wasn't Benjamin Moore, but one of the paint shops that I use back home. I mean, at the Home Depots even, you can get like these thick, really like heavy duty paint trays, and it's so easy to reuse them over and over 100 times. Like I've used them over years. I even brought one back from Canada with me because I knew I would paint here because it's more environmentally friendly. And the latex layers, like even if you don't get the coverage, as long as you're not doing very matte paint, you don't even need to buy like the plastic covering to go in. You can just let the latex paint dry, and after many layers of it, it's so fun. Like you just peel off this dried latex paint.
Oh,
it's
that's
the most
awesome.
like, satisfying thing in the world. Yeah. And then the other thing you might need is, I would say you would need an angle brush. And so that's any of the kind of like work that you'll be doing with your hands, and they call it cutting when you're using the brush to go along an edge. That's the term. You'll want an angle brush for that. And most people, I think, hold a brush incorrectly. But you're actually not supposed to hold the brush by the stick end. The stick end is actually just there as a counterbalance to the weight of the brush. So I'm
learning so much.
To hold. I know, right? You're actually supposed to hold kind of using like your thumb, and I guess, is it the forefinger, the next finger? You're kind of using that to pinch the area of like the metal on the brush, and you have the stick kind of like, on the area where your fingers connect. Anyway, so the handle is kind of leaning outwards, and your brush, your hand is quite close to the bristles, so you actually have a lot of control of being able to direct where the angle goes. And so taking that, you can very easily like hold something and like go along and do a straight line. I'm hoping I'm describing it as easily as possible to be understood on audio, but
yeah. That's so helpful, and I'll tell you why. So it sounds like you're supposed to hold it more like a pencil than, like, for example, an eyeshadow brush, because I was taught with eyeshadow brushes, it's actually the opposite, where you hold it at like towards the end so that you get more like, I don't know, angle or light touch, or obviously we'll have to have a makeup artist on for another episode to teach me how to do makeup. But so that's really interesting, because I would have assumed, like, everything you're saying makes more sense, that you want that really fine control. So basically that you're kind of holding the angle brush more like a pencil than like an eyeshadow brush.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, do you have other steps or tips before I start bombarding you with questions?
So yes, I think pretty much you've covered your floors, you've taped up the edges, you've done all, and then you'll probably do your plastering. You let that dry, you sand, you check again, you do it again if you need it, and then you take your first, and then you kind of just covered at least the plaster area. If you have really good paint, you probably don't need to prime. In most cases, you'll do two coats and you'll be able to cover. I would say another thing to note is if you are doing like a really unique color like red, I feel like red is one of those colors that you want to make sure you're going to get it from a brand who knows how to do it, because red can come out kind of pink from my understanding. Like it's one of these colors that's hard to work with, and the base is actually I think like a gray, for it to actually like come out as red. And so for those
Huh.
ones, I would ask the paint store, you might want to get like a gray primer for that so that the red really pops, and that it'll be as vibrant as it's supposed to be. But all else, most colors cover quite easily. Yeah, and if you do something like black too, I think those are one of those ones that where they're kind of like on the edge of the spectrum. There might be some, where you might need to have a special base or a primer, or might need to do like three or more coats for those to really like show their true colors. Yeah.
So, are you an advocate of like swatching or like testing a little bit of the paint color on the wall? Like, I've seen people, I think my mother used to do this too, where like you paint a little patch that's like a couple inch, like a little rectangle on the wall so that you can see what the paint looks like in the room when it dries. Is it something that you usually do or recommend?
I I totally recommend it, because I feel like on a swatch to where you see it, and also depending on how the light hits your room, colors
Hmm.
really change. Like they can look completely different based on your room. Maybe the lighting gives it more of a blue hue. And so this green that you thought was really nice can kind of look like teal suddenly in the light. And so, especially if you are going with brighter colors on a small swatch and then in a big area, it makes a huge difference. Like it can look completely different. So, actually, when I painted my living room this time, it took me forever. And I did do a few swatches because I did want to go with I was going for this rich library living room. And I felt like some of the blues or the greens were coming out like a little bit, I don't know, too artificial for me. It wasn't exactly, and I ended up going with a dark gray. I think it was like Witching Hour by Benjamin Moore, which is also one of their, and it looks great. I think just because the room itself has a little bit of a, like the lighting hits it, there is like a slight maybe blue, so there was color in a way that I wanted, and that's great. I have these old baseboards that are quite high, so I did like that dark gray along the edge and the door frames and the door in that dark gray. So they really pop, which is really nice. And then they lead into the library, old school Victorian living room. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
So I'm open for questions.
perfect, because I have a lot. So, like my first one is, what do you recommend to people that know that they want to paint their home or a room in their house, but they really don't know how to choose a color, or they just really don't know where to start in terms of like, I want it to be different. I have all these practical tips, but how do I pick the color for this room?
Yeah, I mean, best case scenario is like if you've seen a room or have a friend's room that you really like, and I would just try to get like a paint swatch that matches so you can go find it and like pick as closely as possible. Or if they have an old paint can, then you can get the exact color. Um, I would say a lot of the some of the professional painting stores, if you happen to have some swatch or something, they're actually able to find what that color is and make it. So even if you find something else, they have a machine that can. And I don't know if all places do this, but when I was painting and I was going to the paint stores that, do professional painting, they have that capability. And then next is I would, do like something like Pinterest, like check on the interwebs, go through some magazines, try to find something that actually like size wise matches your room, I would say, because color and the scale of your room definitely does have different effects. And so you want to take those into consideration, and also like maybe even like if you have really high walls or not, and how color affects that. And I won't be the perfect person to ask because I forget if it's like the reverse. If you do lighter, it makes the room bigger. I think if you do darker, it helps bring the room, like if you have really tall ceilings, to help bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's always also like feel like if you're trying to go for a cozier space or you want it to look more open, the colors that you'll choose. So, and you can, I mean, these days you can Google and ask ChatGPT all these tips too, and it'll give you a bunch of answers about. And so if you have a small space, you might ask like, oh, what are colors that would make a small space look bigger? I feel like it's probably light colors, but you can ask ChatGPT.
I love that. I think that's a good use. So, I have never used Chat GPT in my life, but if I were to, I feel like that would be that to me is like a really good application for it. Um, okay, so my next question for you, because I remember again, so I've been painting rooms, or I did paint rooms with my mother when I was like a kid. It was like a really fun thing that we would do. But I remember it being like a very physically demanding task. Do you have any tips for folks to anticipate that and maybe like protect themselves a little?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you kind of have to divide up the tasks over the day. Like, um, you know, prep is probably one day, like where you're just gonna let the paint dry and all you're gonna do is sand. So I feel like, um, yeah, even especially if you have furniture in the room, you have to move everything around. So kind of, taking into account the amount of time it will take. So if you really want to break it down into more like manageable, I would say like prep is one day and getting all that done. And then I would say another day is maybe just doing the cutting. So that's where you use the brush and you kind of go along all the edges and seams. Um, and then the funnest part, the most, is the rolling, because then it's that's when you really get to see all the hard work that you've done and the beautiful colors shine through. And so I would kind of like divide it up into those 3 days. And usually I feel like rolling is, you can probably do, it should be no problem to get 2 rolls done in a day. It takes, usually an hour and a half between. I feel like the paint would dry and it's already time for you to potentially roll again. But yeah.
And do you have tips for reducing streakiness? Because that's the other thing that again, when you've got kids that are going all over, we never got to do the second coat because we couldn't be
Yeah, so
trusted.
I mean, what I would do is honestly, it's the last coat that matters. So if you have your kids helping and this and that, I'm sure they can do the first coat. I would just double check though that when they're rolling, that they're not leaving too much paint on the roll. So like as you're rolling, and you're coming down with another roll, you kind of half cover the roll you just did as you're moving along. So and you want to roll pretty much from the top all the way down to the bottom, and that's why the sticks are good. So you have a very consistent. It's like one roll for one roll of the wall, and then as you're coming back up, maybe you're moving like you're still covering about a third of your last roll, and then you kind of and you want an even. You're not pushing into the wall. You're kind of just letting the roller like run down and up. So it's this even pressure as you're going up and down the wall, and you just kind of go down the wall. And so if you happen to notice as you're rolling, and then you look back and you notice like, oh, there's some fat streaks of paint that I've left over there. It's fine for you to just keep that same consistency and go up and down and roll back the opposite way. When the paint is still wet, it's okay. Like if it dries, because they were all wet, so when it dries, it'll dry evenly. What you don't want to do is um, once the paint is fully dried and then you roll over in one spot, because that paint is going to dry as a layer on top, and then it'll pick up light a little differently. And then so if you're someone who's very detail oriented, you're going to notice like, oh, there's something off about that. So as long as the paint is wet, you can roll back and cover it, and continue and keeping that consistent pressure. And so yeah, you can let your kids do the first row. So if it's not perfect, as long as there's not these huge globs of paint, but you want your last roll to be your perfect one. And so maybe for that roll, you get them out of the room and you do that one, and you let the paint dry. Yeah.
That explains why my mother would always do that overnight. Like we would do the first part and then we'd have dinner and take a break and then we would go to bed and then she would finish it while we were sleeping. And it always looked a lot better then. Although I was in charge of doing all of the edges usually because that was my favorite part.
That's great, because that's that part. I'm like, oh, it's so slow and long. The rolling part is honestly my favorite.
I'm very short, so the rolling was always like really tough work. I'd have to stand on a ladder or use a really long like handle, and it just was less for me. Okay, what are your feelings about painting ceilings?
Yeah, so painting ceilings. So this is where also I think knowing about the sheen of a paint is important. So paints usually have like matte, so there's no shine at all. Um, is it? Sorry, because I lived in Quebec, so it's like velouté, which is
Yeah,
the
whatever.
next, like eggshell, I think, semi gloss, and then gloss and high gloss. And so a lot of times people do like high gloss, like and that this is more a preference between very high gloss or semi gloss and all that for like baseboards and frames or doors, because that's where a lot of dirt gets. It's easier to wipe them and easier to clean. And then also some people just like the contrast of the pop of the change. And so most people will choose eggshell for the walls. So it has a little bit of a sheen, but it's kind of matte. And also a good thing about good quality paint is that you can wipe things down and the paint won't rub off. So like for eggshell walls, you'll be able to wash them, and they're still going to be, uh, you know, um, their true colors, and they'll wipe off easily. Um, and then for the ceilings, most people will go with flat for the ceilings, because it's not like you're touching your ceilings, your fingerprints are on them. And so the reason you go for flat is because the ceiling probably does have some unevenness, and you want to see as little of that as possible. So when the light shines, and with anything glossy, you can obviously see all the like bumps and shadows from the light shining on it. But when something's matte, you don't really see all those bumps, because the light isn't reflecting off of it in different angles. So making the ceiling flat makes the ceiling actually look more perfect than it is. And if you I know a lot of places will sell like bathroom paint, and they won't do matte for the bathrooms and the kitchen because they know you have oil and water. But if you I will buy like good quality paint that's intended for the bathroom and kitchen, so that I can stay true to doing it flat. Yeah. Yeah, because I like the look of like flat ceilings. Yeah.
That's super helpful. So, you mentioned up top that for you, you came to this through this painting business in college. And it sounds like, as you mentioned, the entrepreneurship and the creativity and all of these things are so closely related. So, what was it about entrepreneurship through painting that was different than having a different type of business?
I mean, it was first time it wasn't like a 9 to 5 or like a structured business for me. I mean, I'm sure most business, if you're a business owner, you don't have a 9 to 5, but that was my first experience of it. And so it was, I think, yeah, the first reality kick of what is it really like to own your own business? Because I remember I was sometimes, waking up at 5 in the morning to prep for the next day's job or making sure everything's set up and going to bed super late and that the crew knew where they need to be and the customers knew that we were coming that week or this day because certain paint jobs take less time, more time, or we couldn't paint outdoors because of the weather, and you have to switch things around. So there was constant things to have to solve for, which was really interesting, but it was definitely very stressful. But I think what I realized from that it was I was definitely someone who uh, wanted to do quality work. Um, and so I think that stood out in the job we did, and I was proud of that.
That's amazing. What would you say to others who are looking to combine creativity and entrepreneurship?
I mean, I think they go hand in hand. I honestly think, yeah, you have to have some sort of creative mind to be able to think of like what you're building, your vision, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be artistically creative. So I think if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, you're already a creator.
I totally agree. I think that there's that like generative energy that's really necessary to be willing to start a business, that you have to like be willing to think outside the box. The cat is very upset that she is in podcast jail right now. She really wants to be part of this. Um, sorry. But yeah, I think that I really love how you describe bringing these kind of spirits together. It's something that I usually don't think about as going together because I think of like business in this one sort of box that is separate from this entrepreneurship that's like richer and full of all of these other values and sort of more exciting creative spirits. So how has painting rooms and owning this painting business helped you in other areas of your life?
I mean, I definitely think it gave me some just like lessons about being strategic because I think like in that instance, one of the things I learned was um, managing having more teams bigger is not always better. So managing 3 crews, the amount of work it took to do that wasn't actually financially beneficial for me because had I done 2 crews, which was very much easier than juggling 3 jobs, I could have done some of the painting on my side, and I financially would have made much more, and that would have been less stress because it's easier to manage my time and be the dynamic one for certain situations. And so those were some of the lessons that I learned. And so, and I think it was just also awakening. Like, I mean, when I did, when I built the painting business and they taught us to do, and I probably need to remind myself this again. It's like I didn't know how to paint at that time. I was selling paint, like they taught us how to do estimates. I had no idea how to paint until we did all the estimates at the beginning of the year, and then in the summer we started painting. And so I only started learning how to paint in the summer. But here I was going off and selling these painting jobs, and so there was like all this uncertainty, and there was just the need to trust the process and trust yourself that you would figure it all out. And I think even in me doing my coaching business and now running this nonprofit, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about stepping into new roles, new positions, or things that we don't know about what will happen, or even the environmental, economical state of things. And so trusting that, we'll figure it out is, I think, a lesson I need to carry forward from my university years.
What a powerful way of bringing all of that together. Because I can definitely, we've done co-coaching and coaching peer supervision together. So, I know these things about you. And it's so cool to hear how that's been a thread throughout your whole life, basically, is kind of taking on these challenges, bringing all these pieces together, jumping into things, making it part of your life, even before you've ever done it before. So I think that's really cool. What words of wisdom or advice would you give to other people who are interested, who are not like me and did not have a paint roller put in their hand when they were 7 years old and are interested in painting a room for the very first time? What advice do you give to them?
I mean, honestly, I think it's a lot easier and it's a lot of fun. So don't overthink it. Just buy a little starter kit and, worst case scenario, you can paint over it. Yeah.
Yes. I love it. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing all of this incredible perspective and really good, solid tips on painting. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and what you do when you're not painting your apartment?
Yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn. Just search up my name, Natalie Pan, Pan like Peter Pan. And then you can also find me on my coaching website at nottocrazy.com.
Beautiful. I love it so much. Well, thank you for joining me. And I hope to have you back on the pod soon to talk about painting the outside of your house or coaching or all of these other amazing things that you do.
And thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Kat.
Well, that was something you can do. What did you think? If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. All those things you do for your favorite podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And if you didn't like it, that sounds like a you problem. Now remember, this show is called Something You Can Do, not things you should do or things you must do. Some of these things will contradict each other. Some things might not work for you based on your geographic location, physical ability, or personal preferences. And that's okay, because there are many different ways to live a rich, full life. So I hope that you learned something you can do, that you're doing things a little differently, and we'll see you next time.